In his last days, Jacques de Molay faced a question larger than guilt or innocence. What did the Templar Grand Master carry in his memory from the lost Holy Land? Not a proven treasure, not a forbidden relic, not a hidden map we can point to with certainty, but something quieter and perhaps more dangerous: the knowledge of roads, fortresses, alliances, money, and sacred ground. Before the flames made Jacques de Molay a legend, he was something more human. He was the last visible head of an order that had spent generations moving between Europe and the Holy Land, not simply praying, not simply fighting, watching, remembering, learning how to survive across borders that most rulers understood only from a distance. So the mystery is not whether he guarded a chest of gold. There is no solid evidence for that. The sharper question is practical. What did the Templars know before they fell? Which roads could carry men and supplies? Which fortresses mattered after a crusade was over? Which alliances were useful? Which promises were fragile? And how did money move through a world of pilgrims, ports, debts, and sacred geography? Picture the familiar image: a desert fortress under a white sun, a map half hidden in shadow, a red cross marked where history and rumor meet. It is powerful because it suggests treasure, but the real secret, if there was one, may have been knowledge, not a single object buried under stone, but a network of memory built over decades. In this story, fact must be separated from theory, legend, and speculation. The evidence for hidden Templar secrets is thin, so the claims must stay careful. But careful does not mean empty. If the Templar secret was not treasure, then why did their fall feel so dangerous to the people who destroyed them? To understand why Jacques de Molay mattered, we have to step back from the image of a knight guarding one secret. The Templars were not simply warriors in white mantles. In basic terms, they were a military religious order, born from the problem of protecting Christian pilgrims moving through dangerous territory, then transformed by history into something far larger. Over generations, the order became tied to war, estates, fortresses, custody of money, royal favors, transport, and diplomacy. It had houses in the west and strongholds in the east. It could move men, messages, and value across distances that ordinary travelers experienced as slow and dangerous. That did not make the Templars supernatural. It made them organized, and in the medieval world, organization could look almost like magic. The Holy Land, meanwhile, was never just a battlefield on a map. It was not one simple political space, and it was not only a stage for crusader armies. It was a living network of roads, ports, castles, wells, farms, markets, sacred sites, local rulers, rival powers, merchants, translators, and messengers. A route that looked short on parchment might be useless without water. A fortress that looked strong might fail without supplies. A promise made by one lord could mean little if another local power controlled the road. To survive there for more than a single campaign, an institution had to remember far more than prayers and battle plans. This is where the word secret becomes more interesting. Modern audiences still search for Templar secrets, often expecting a buried chest, a forbidden relic, or a hidden map. Those stories belong to legend and theory, unless evidence supports them. But there is another possibility, more modest and perhaps more believable. The real secret may have been institutional memory. The Templars had time to learn what outsiders could not easily learn. They may have known which roads were viable in different seasons, which ports mattered, which castles were truly defensible, allies could be trusted, and which diplomatic promises were mostly ceremony. Historians can debate how much of this knowledge was preserved and how carefully it was guarded. We cannot point to one master file and say, here is the lost intelligence of the order, but it is reasonable to ask what any long-lived frontier institution would gather simply by surviving. This is why the story is not only about knights, it is about power networks, and about how knowledge can become dangerous when it is carried by an institution with money, land, discipline, and memory. By the time the Templars lost their eastern strongholds, they may have lost territory, But did they still possess the knowledge that made territory valuable? The first answer to what the Templars knew may be less mystical than the legends suggest, but far more useful. They knew movement, they knew distance, they knew the difference between a road that looked safe on parchment and a road that could actually carry pilgrims, horses, armor, grain, water, and wounded men through contested country. The Holy Land was not only a sacred landscape, it was also a hard physical system, a place of coastal routes, inland tracks, exposed crossings, fortified stops, ports, wells, markets, and roads that could be open one season, dangerous the next. To a pilgrim arriving from Europe, a map might show holy places. To a military order living in that world, the more important map was practical. Where could a column move without breaking apart? Where could supplies be stored? Which route exposed travelers to attack? Which fortress could be reinforced quickly, and which one looked strong but could become isolated? This is where the Templis Terris mystery becomes more grounded. Factually, the military orders operated across contested regions, and their role required more than courage in battle. They had to understand logistics. They had to protect movement. They had to hold positions, maintain communications, and respond to danger across a landscape where faith, war, trade, and diplomacy overlapped. That kind of knowledge does not come from one secret book. It comes from repetition, memory, failure, and survival. Imagine, not as proof, but as a way to understand their world, a candlelit table with a rough map spread across it. Not a magical chart, not a lost treasure plan, just a working image of routes, strongholds, coastlines, and risks, a mark where water might be found, a warning beside a dangerous pass, a memory of how long supplies took to reach a fortress, a note about where an escort had once been delayed. In a world before modern mapping, such knowledge could be power. The legends go further. They imagine hidden maps, secret tunnels, buried cities, or routes known only to initiated knights. Those ideas remain speculation unless evidence supports them. There is no need to claim a vanished master plan to see why the Templars mattered. The more defensible possibility is that they held something slower and more human, accumulated practical intelligence about how the Holy Land worked on the ground, and that may have been more valuable than a relic. A relic could inspire, a fortress could defend, but knowing how to connect places, how to move between them, and how to judge which strongholds were truly useful could shape campaigns, pilgrimages, and political decisions. When the eastern strongholds were lost, the order may have lost territory, but it did not instantly lose memory. That memory followed men like Jacques de Molay into the final years of the order. He did not need to carry a hidden map beneath his cloak to represent danger. He stood for an institution that had spent generations learning roads, ports, fortresses, and fragile lines of survival. If the Templars understood the Holy Land as a living system of roads and strongholds, who inherited that knowledge when the order was broken? But roads and fortresses were only part of the story. The next kind of Templar knowledge was quieter. It did not sit on a hilltop or guard a gate. It moved through promises, seals, records, deposits, escorts, and the simple medieval problem of trust. In a world where travel was slow and dangerous, money was not just something a person carried. It was a risk. A pilgrim traveling east needed safety. A noble preparing for campaign needed supplies long before an army reached the coast. A ruler needed reliable custody, communication, credit, and people who could act at a distance. The Templars became powerful in part because they could connect places that most individuals could not connect on their own. This does not mean they ran a modern bank in the way we would understand the word today. That would be too simple. But as broad historical context, the order had houses, officials, resources, and administrative habits across regions. A network like that could hold value, transmit instructions, protect goods, and remember obligations. It could make movement through Europe and toward the eastern Mediterranean less chaotic. It could also move information along with money, because every transaction carried knowledge. Who was desperate? Who was reliable? Who had influence? Who owed favors? Who could not pay? Here the Holy Land returns to the center of the mystery. Crusading was not only a matter of courage and banners, it required grain, ships, animals, weapons, wages, letters, interpreters, escorts, lodging, and credit. Pilgrims needed protection, armies needed staging points, nobles needed contacts, rulers needed institutions that could survive longer than a single campaign season. The Templars, because they had lived between frontier and court, may have understood the financial anatomy of crusading better than many of the people who preached it from a distance. Here again, fact has to be separated from theory. The fact is that the Templars were not merely battlefield knights. They were also administrators and custodians inside a wide religious and military organization. The theory, more controversial, is that their records and memories may have exposed weaknesses in powerful people around them. Some interpretations suggest that an order involved in custody, credit, and long-distance administration could have known uncomfortable things about royal need, noble dependency, and political failure. But that remains interpretation. Without specific evidence, it cannot be treated as the proven reason for their destruction. Still, the possibility matters because it changes the meaning of a secret. A secret does not have to be a relic wrapped in cloth. It can be a ledger. It can be a chain of obligations. It can be the knowledge that one ruler depended on loans, another depended on contacts, another depended on the continued silence of men who understood how campaigns were really financed. Jacques de Molay stands at the end of this system like the last public face of an old memory. By his final years, the Eastern mission that had given the order its purpose had been shattered, but the institutional habits remained. Houses, accounts, loyalties, and reputation still existed in the West, even after the strongest castles were gone. To prosecutors and kings, de Molay was not only a defeated warrior, he represented continuity. He represented an organization whose records and human memory reached beyond one kingdom, beyond one court, back toward the lost struggle for the Holy Land. So the question deepens. Was the dangerous Templar secret a sacred object or a ledger of obligations, loyalties, and debts that powerful men preferred to erase? And beyond maps and ledgers, there was one more form of knowledge. The Templars knew people. In the Holy Land, power did not move only through armies. It moved through messengers, translators, merchants, local leaders, rival lords, religious authorities, and men who knew when a gate would open, when a promise meant nothing. For an order like the Templars, survival required more than courage in battle. It required reading the human terrain. The Holy Land was not a simple border between one world and another. It was a contested frontier, crowded with Christian powers, Muslim powers, local communities, trading networks, pilgrims, envoys, and military orders with their own ambitions. A fortress could be strong, a road could be known, and money could be available. None of that mattered if the people around those systems changed sides, withheld supplies, delayed a message, treated a public agreement as ceremony rather than commitment. Factually, military religious orders operated for generations in regions where diplomacy, trade, war, and local negotiation overlapped. They encountered enemies, allies, rivals, intermediaries, and civilians. They could not function only by swinging swords. The inference is that long-lived frontier organizations naturally accumulated what we might now call human intelligence, a sense of which families mattered, which commanders could be negotiated with, which local guides were reliable, which rival leaders were desperate, which promises were likely to collapse under pressure. That does not prove a hidden master file, a secret treaty, or a single forbidden alliance. It means that the order may have possessed something more ordinary and perhaps more useful: experience. A Templar commander who had spent years in the East did not need a mystical revelation to understand the value of a translator, the danger of a divided coalition, or the difference between public hostility and private communication. He could learn who spoke for real power, who spoke only for display, and who might be persuaded when survival was at stake. In this sense, the most sensitive knowledge was not necessarily sacred. It was political, it was personal, it lived in memory, habit, and relationships. This is also where legend often grows. Later stories sometimes turn every contact across religious or political lines into evidence of conspiracy. That is too simple. On a frontier, contact was not automatically scandalous. Negotiation could be practical. Truce could be temporary. Trade could continue even where war existed. The mystery is not that the Templars met different worlds. The mystery is what they learned by surviving among them for so long. By the time Jacques de Molay stood as the last Grand Master, he did not have to possess a relic, a hidden map, or a chest of treasure to represent a threat. He represented continuity. He stood at the end of an institution that had carried roots, debts, memories, loyalties, rivalries, and old names across decades of conflict. If the order was broken, those memories might scatter. Some would die with men. Some would pass quietly into other hands. Some would become legend because no one could fully prove what had been known. And that leaves the central question hanging over de Molay's final days. If Jacques de Molay carried the order's final memory, what vanished with him? Secrets of faith, secrets of war, or secrets of diplomacy?
So what did the Templars know?
The most cautious answer is also the most interesting. They likely knew how the Holy Land worked in practice, not as a single sacred picture on parchment, and not as a proven vault of hidden treasure, as a living system of roads, ports, fortresses, debts, loyalties, languages, rival powers, and fragile promises. That does not prove a lost archive. It does not prove a buried relic. It does not prove that Jacques de Molay carried one forbidden document into his final hours. Those belong, unless evidence is brought forward, to theory, legend, or speculation. But the absence of a dramatic object does not make the mystery smaller. It may make it more realistic. In that realistic version, the Templar secret was institutional memory. It was the experience of men who had watched campaigns succeed and fail, who knew which routes drained an army before battle. Strongholds could endure isolation, and which alliances sounded impressive but collapsed under pressure. It was knowledge gathered slowly, carried in letters, habits, records, and minds, then scattered when the order was broken. That is why Jacques de Molay matters here, as more than a symbol of martyrdom or accusation. In his last days, he stood at the end of a chain. Behind him were generations of movement between Western Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. Behind him were castles lost, contacts severed, obligations disputed, and a mission that had once justified enormous power. When he disappeared from history, something less visible disappeared with him, the order as a continuous memory. This is why the story still pulls us back. It sits where empire, faith, finance, war, and geography meet. It asks whether power is only land and armies, or whether power can also be stored in roots remembered. Debts recorded, trust earned, and dangers recognized early. The Templars lost their foothold in the East, then their place in Europe. But the question remains, who understood what had been lost? Some theories claim the answer lies in treasure, relics, hidden maps, or secret archives. Those claims are powerful because they are easy to picture, but they require the most care. Without strong evidence, they remain possibilities at the edge of history, not conclusions. The more defensible possibility is quieter. The real inheritance of the Templars may have been a network inside human memory, how to move across hostile ground, how to fund a distant campaign, how to read a ruler's promise, how to survive between worlds that officially called each other enemies. That kind of knowledge leaves fewer glittering traces. It can vanish into other orders, other courts, other merchants, and other men who never announce what they have learned. So the last days of Jacques de Molay do not give us a solved mystery. They give us a narrower, more human one. Not necessarily a chest under a temple, not necessarily a lost relic waiting in darkness, but the collapse of a power network that had learned the Holy Land through use, risk, failure, and memory. Continue with Empire Secrets, where the next mystery is not whether empires fall, but what their survivors carry into the shadows after the banners come down.